When German turned his head to look at the boy, recently arrived in the workshop doorway, he was seeing him for the first time. It left him mute, silently staring at a juvenile hunter. Had he not been dressed like many other hunters, and had not Kenrick waved for him to step inside, he would have taken him for a misplaced individual. He continued to attentively follow him with his eyes, as the lad approached the table they were gathered at. He suddenly was able to place the face in his memory among the youngsters as they all completed their course for their new duty. But how improper to have forgotten the name. He now stood beside him, bowing hurriedly, then met Kenrick's eyes opposite the table. "You have something for us?"
"Yeah, we just got back."
"What about the doctor?" The lad shook his head with short black hair.
"Nothing. But things have changed." "Were you out hunting last night?"
German interjected. The young man turned and nodded.
"Yes, master." "All right. So what changed?" "So, suddenly there was no one there. Completely abandoned. Someone mistook me for a doctor when I entered."
"People are catching on then," Kenrick added. "Increased activity over the past 4 days. No sign of the man himself surfacing, and now... what? All gone?" The lad shrugged, like he felt everyone's questioning looks accused him of involvement.
"It was just empty. I hoped... well, I suppose you would know more than me as to why."
Kenrick, Vitus and German looked at Maria, the only one currently seated and staring with a perturbed brow into the table.
"I have no idea,"
she finally said.
"It has just been quiet, but not dead. They were there, working."
"How about last night?"
German turned back to the lad. He had hoped the name would trigger upon addressing him.
"Same as always. Oh well, you know, with the comings and goings." "How long did they stay? Longer than usual?" "No, I saw them leave. Individually. First one went after an hour or so. Perhaps there was 1 or 2 that never re-emerged before we left." "When was that?" "Just before dawn. Was home in time for the sun to rise, master."
He nodded. Maria leaned forward, grunting as she rested her chin in her hand.
"Wonder how long this has transpired,"
she muttered, barely loud enough for them to hear.
"No good way of telling, unfortunately."
Kenrick crossed his arms and glanced at the young man. "But people who should have been there weren't. More than once, as we can attest to. I doubt we discovered their first venture. Whatever that many people were doing in Corin's clinic, it may very well precede his disappearance."
"How were they?"
Maria looked up at the recruit, decisiveness having entered her mood.
"The people. Whom did you speak with when you last visited? When was it?"
Yesterday afternoon. I tried to enter the door in the back, but was stopped. I had to pretend I was just lost, but they seemed keen on keeping me out."
"That's because of the research, lad. Nothing too strange."
"Yes, but I asked after Corin, and they said he was in, but busy."
"What?"
Maria leaned in closer over the table, her fist almost slamming down into the wood.
Yes, that's what he said. I could not press him more, but I felt it was enough.
It was indeed. Is that all, lad? German said, to which he nodded. Then you are excused for the moment. Hang around a bit outside, would ya? He bowed slightly and headed out. German fell silent for a moment. The others were too, but more so with anticipation. He finally turned to Kenrick. How is the lad? The veteran hunter raised an eyebrow. I wouldn't know. Not one of the Otto trainees. Seemed capable enough from my limited view. Must be a new one here. German turned over at Vitus, who had kept quiet and idling with a blank expression in their peripheral vision. You? He shifted where he stood, leaning against the wall. I was done with him the month prior. A promising one. A foreigner, but fits right in. Keeps a cooler head than most. He looked over at Maria, who glanced back up at him from under her worriedly downturned brow. He then turned back to the others. Get some information on who should be working at the clinic. It should obviously not be abandoned in the middle of the day. I want to know who now also might be gone. Very good. We'll see to it. They left swiftly. When he looked at her, her eyes turned away from him. Go on, you. Tell me about it already. She stood up and headed after the others. But she turned around, looking down distantly to the floor and put her arms at her side, meandering back into the workshop. Eventually she bumped her back against the wall and slid down against it until she sat on the floor. German eventually spoke. I admit, it starts to look more and more suspicious.
It's not about Corin.
She sighed deeply.
It's about Lawrence.
He walked over and pulled out a chair, sitting himself down facing her.
How can he think so lightly of this? About everything? Whatever happened to fear the old blood? German, you must surely know him best. Is it not strange?
She looked at him pleadingly, sincerely so. I know that at times he can appear self-absorbed, but that's how his mind is. I would say that Lawrence prefers solitude when overcome with hardship. You remember, don't you? How he only would share his research once he deemed it complete. He smirked faintly at the recollection. You know, he had this process that was not to be disturbed. Only could we see when he thought the notes were ready.
He would stand and leave suddenly.
Maria dreamily reminisced.
During lectures or even during dinner. Once the thought came, he had to be alone.
But he always came back. She nodded, but her face soon hardened with annoyance.
He thinks the blood can solve all his problems, appearing more and more like a cleric than a scholar. I fear there is little calculation, only the piety of a devoted man. having turned solely to a greater will.
Surely that is how it seems. But you'll soon see the same man coming to us for the answer he is missing. If it is faith he wants, is it not ours he has always needed?
When she looked up at him, he was stricken with a sweet nostalgia. The look upon her face was the same as when he had bumped his head against the desk in the Bergenworth lecture hall. How he had peered out from under to see those light green shimmering eyes looking back at him. It had been a timid look, eyes filled with anticipation and nervousness. It was, for some reason, a look he had remembered strongly and was caught seeing it on occasions within his mind. Seeing it in the moment, he realized it was not as sweet as he had anticipated. When they walked out, the young lad had seated himself down by the steps on the stone wall running along the little downward path. In the shade of the small trees, he was reading from a book. He closed it promptly when his head turned to see them both approaching. German was still at a loss for the young man's name.
Very well. Good that you stayed. This here is Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower and head of the research hall.
She extended her hand in a friendly greeting. He stepped down from the wall, leaving the book, to return the gesture.
Brado. Hunter.
Upon hearing the name, he instantly recalled more about him. How he had been a lurking student among the prospectors, quickly looking for an alternative to the labyrinth. A quiet trainee, but had shown competence from previous experience, and with a determination to utilize a foreignly crafted mace as his primary hunter weapon. He sneakily threw a glance at the book, an analytical work by Lawrence on specifically the labyrinth.
It's time to get to the bottom of this. You'll accompany us later to investigate the clinic. We'll wait into the night in case activity resumes. Otherwise, we'll head inside.
German was sitting alone atop a vista point with an overview of the great valley descent. Ahead of him, on the other side, lay Cathedral Ward, and further along the street, directly below him, running right beside the steep slope, lay Corin's clinic. The houses had long since become dark, and he stood alone leaning over the stone railing, peering to the inactive clinic. The streetlights were illuminating the exterior entrance, which no one so far had utilized. Due to the curfew, the streets were eerily desolate. He peered up for a moment at the full moon, asking it his questions. Where was Corin? Why was the clinic abandoned? And why did he think so much about Maria's troubles regarding Lawrence? Suddenly, quiet steps ascended the metal ladder, running up to his spot, and the woman herself appeared. To his discreet delight, she had returned to her old hunting attire. It was surprisingly well kept. She shook her head at him, with the moonlight shining at her back. He sighed.
No, did not think so.
And here?
Nothing.
She leaned beside him over the railing.
Praetor should arrive soon then.
Don't think it will be different for him. He fixed his eyes on the grand clinic building and thought to himself for a moment before speaking. I've been meaning to ask, how are you feeling? This research hall debacle, does it bother you terribly?
This is the moment you choose for small talk.
Come now, you needn't tell. But if it would help, then please do.
I'd rather not speak of it. Later, perhaps.
I do wonder. Your patients. They have become like your own little family. Like I have mine now. What makes you choose to leave them behind for this mystery hunt? She made a short, irritated grunt.
There are plenty of capable personnel caring for them. Besides, they are not children. They can decide for themselves what's good for them.
But you don't think it's good for them.
What is?
Whatever it is you are implying they need to decide on.
It's complicated. I cannot deny it to them. Perhaps we are more similar than I thought. You have your hunters. I have my saints. We both know it needs to be done, but it shouldn't be glorified.
Good then that they have us, to remind them of the grim parts.
But my girls don't have a choice. Their blood.
You know, to allow my hunters some thrill. It's unavoidable. But I keep firm, and I think it makes them understand, in a way. With you around, the saints may be showered in all the church's glory, told that they are the divine rescue, but you'll ground them, reminded that they are, after all, only human. And regarding Lawrence, I think it reminds him too. Her ailing expression suggested she had been moved by his words, and her eyes turned downward as if searching over the ground aimlessly for an answer. In a moment, Brader emerged up the same ladder. Nothing, he said while still climbing up. And inside? Yep, the same. How about your angle? They both shook their heads. So, we're going in. The door was not locked, which made German look over his shoulder at the other's reaction, which largely mimicked his own of worry. They stepped inside, where it was even darker than outside. Each of them lit their lanterns and continued inside the antechamber, beyond which lay a grander hall still occupied with several sickbeds. It was not messy, although some shelves seemed particularly cleaned out, suggesting that perhaps someone had vacated them with criminal motives. Otherwise it looked just as if the doctors had stepped out for a spell. The strangest part was that the patients sick of the plague presumably had done the same. Most of the beds were made, with only a minority appearing disheveled from recent rest. They stepped through the room and up the long stair leading into the back offices and the isolated treatment halls. That door was, however, locked when German felt at the knob. He glanced back at Brader, who whispered to him,
Yeah, they were quick to catch me, but that one was locked before as well.
Maria stepped in front of them and retrieved a keychain. The key, however, once fitted, did not manage to unlock it.
What do you think?
German whispered as she looked back at him.
Door or window?
She tugged at the firm double door. It did indeed seem sturdy. She retrieved the dual blade and poked with it through the crevice. It lodged itself rather quickly, and she jerked it up and down until she retrieved it, turning fully to the two of them.
Window.
They stepped outside and looked up towards the roof, straight from the doorstep. He pointed to a balcony serving as roof to the doorway, then moved a finger to the tall windows, then onto the brick outlines around the protruding tower adornments. She nodded and leapt up into a mist to the balcony. He was quick to follow her, throwing only a quick glance back to affirm Brader had understood. He only saw him getting ready to climb up the pillars with a running start before he himself darted after Maria to leap onto the exterior plating. Competitively, they scaled the facade by utilizing the window frames and the many protruding stone adornments until Maria victoriously stepped onto the roof. He was quick behind her, and he briefly saw her face as she looked back. The brief, excited expression of the thrill suggested she had missed it. She started running on the very top of the roof where it was flat. There had never been someone like her, who with such grace and purity expressed the entirety of her being. Only with her did he notice himself struggle to compare. Only with her did he feel like he could transcend beyond his current skill. It was with her he saw the grace that truly lay in the heart of the hunt. Something that transcended the role of hunter and prey, stripping the two out of its meaning, leaving only the pure and unending pursuit of purpose, granting everlasting mercy. They darted in between the chimneys, and in a cloud they leapt down on the left side of the major building onto a lower roof. Windows lined the wall, and upon looking inside, saw it was, to their estimation, most likely beyond the locked door. The moon shone brightly down upon them as they stood on the adjoining building's roof, and they both turned to look up at it. At first their breaths heaved from the quick run, but it faded and everything became silent. He looked down to see her moonlit face, pale and perfect. He realized that as he saw her, chin up, staring at the moon, that he would forever remember that specific moment particularly. She turned then to look at him, and he saw fully how beautifully the moonlight was caught in her eyes. The task of the present was forgotten to him in that moment, and the tribulations of the future faded as well. They mattered little when he looked into those eyes. Why ever would someone need to consume holy blood look to the stars or listen to faint whispers, when such a pleasant sensation emerged just by losing oneself in those eyes. Hearing Brador's step approaching, Maria turned to start fiddling with the latch of the window with her dagger. Brador too appeared winded, but like them quickly regained himself. The corridor they entered into was similarly derelict as previously discovered. Tidy, yet with the expectant appearance that someone would soon arrive back. There was a rolling patient table standing haphazardly in the middle of the floor. Further inside they discovered a large room that most likely had been the base for their research. Tall shelves stood on the open floor, and along the wall straight ahead of them ran a stair up to a lesser room. German pointed for Brador to look around the initial space, while he followed Maria up the steps.
Everything looks so ordinary,
Brador commented.
What should I look for?
Just something that strikes you. They continued into the room. Preserved snake cadavers stood on a table in jars, and one lay spread out and cut open.
What could have happened? Everyone just up and left.
Maria examined the snakes, then looked at him.
What did they find? What happened to the others?
Corin had 5 others in his staff. They had been observed around here after his disappearance.
But not anymore. And one of them plainly told a lie about Corin being here. Why would he have hid himself? It must have been a lie.
I agree. There's an awful lot of Hintertomb poison in here.
He took a bottle from one of the wall-side shelves.
Dr. Kim said she was looking into it. Would Corin have done as well?
Maria shrugged, and he turned to walk out. He looked over the railing down at Brador, with his eyes fixed on the shelf's contents.
Hey, find anything like this?
He held up the flask so the moonlight caught it.
What's that? Hinter poison. Oh, yeah. There seemed to be a lot here.
Maria too came out.
Let's look about the basement. Nothing too strange around here.
Outside of the room and along the wall of the corridor lay the inconspicuous cellar entrance. As German and Maria stepped into the basement in terror, Brador continued forward through a door he had to unlock to emerge outside. The basement was not much different from the above. Everything suggested it was but another space used for the same type of plague research. Emerging back, out from their brief investigation, they bumped into Brador, who was in the process of returning inside.
I think I found something strange.
Hurriedly they followed the eager young hunter outside, where they saw how he had uncovered a hole that, judging by the pile beside it, had been obscured deliberately with planks and dirt. The hole was in fact a separate cellar, being constructed with bricks and only accessible through a ladder. Without much comment, Maria descended, to which they hastily followed. Their lantern light illuminated a spacious, featureless room that seemed utterly out of the ordinary due to its location. Everything in regards to its purpose seemed like a stretch. In the empty, furniture-void space, they all honed in on a secondary hole in the floor. Standing around it revealed nothing in terms of sight, although the sounds suggested it was both deep and large. While no breeze was felt, it certainly gave them the impression the hole was simply not an abandoned attempt at a well. German did not try to voice what he felt. Everything he could say only had one reasonable answer, and it evidently was to be found at the bottom of a descending ladder. The walls became raw stone of a tunnel, likely not naturally formed, but due to the many strange holes and the irregular shape that deviated from a particularly shaped cylinder, the circumstances around its emergence remained elusive. Having traveled lengthy down the ladder, with only orange flickering lantern light and the sound of their feet stepping against the wood, he was struck by a strange sense of vertigo. With darkness continuing down below, the sensation sprung from him imagining it would suddenly open up into a massive space that could go on for as far as the earth itself would allow. Ultimately, the horrific places the imagination wandered to was abolished when they stepped onto the stone floor of a cave. Keeping close to the wall, they ventured deeper inside until a small space widened. The lanterns shone into a cavern large enough for the furthest wall to be obscured to them. Glistening over the floor in strange violet hues that caught the light in several colors was a strange substance. Maria knelt down where the substance met the stone. Her head quickly jerked backwards upon growing closer, and she covered her mouth with her hand.
Hintertomb poison.
What? How?
A leak, perhaps. But this...
She looked back towards the ladder, her whispering voice fading out thoughtfully along the echo of the cave.
How could we not have known of this?
She looked back towards the lake of poison, seemingly much larger with the darkness surrounding them.
Could they have been studying this?
Brador proposed quietly.
I mean, with that passage and all.
They may have, but that would mean no one knew about it.
This shouldn't be here. German walked ahead a bit. There were some unstable planks that lay along the wall, half sunken into the poisonous ground.
Someone's been to and fro.
Corin, he must...
She inhaled sharply when something heavy started moving around. A rumbling noise with a bell chiming lightly along it, then evolved into echoing thuds. Something briefly moved into the light of the lanterns, but just as quickly as it had entered, moved back into the dark. In that short moment it revealed itself to be very large, at least 15 feet tall. They all stopped breathing at the sight of it, then remained in terrible anticipation for another glimpse. German finally pointed down the precarious plank path and started treading down. The space remained elusive to them, as most of their light spread along the cave wall directly on the right. While they ventured, the steps continued aimlessly, evidently not possessing any superior form of dark vision. They came upon the end of the cave room, where the planks turned left, continuing along the wall. There, The light illuminated a massive form sitting hunched and unmoving like a statue. One of the tomb giants, astonishingly now existing upon the surface. The merging of the two worlds felt unreal, like the labyrinth never was a physical place. He continued carefully along the wall. Somewhere out of sight, the other giant continued to walk around, with a bell chiming upon every footfall. The slumped figure before them remained like it was as they grew closer. It was covered in rags, and around its left arm sat a manacle with a chain slithering off out of sight. Like many others, its skin was pale from the lack of sun in the depths, but it appeared more like a walking carcass with how its skin was peeling and flesh horrifically rotten. Whatever compelled them to animate was beyond their imagination, as they did not appear to breathe. Something barred away by the Great One's insight, vestiges of the marrow as they were. At the end of the planks the cave continued towards their right, and as quickly, but still as quietly, as they could, they vacated the uneasy location. The tunnel quickly had them emerge into a forest. German quickly recognized it as the gravestone forest by the towering windmills in the distance, beyond the trees. A pleasant place during most times, where one could ruminate on mankind's history and past reverence. However, the iconic and monolithic stone slabs were not present at their location, and he judged, with the location of the windmills and their placement, that the old graves presumably lay on the opposite side of the towering structures. They stepped out further to only the sound of the wind in the leaves. The moon still made the night sky bright, bright enough to cast faint shadows from the terrain. There was buildings ahead. To his awareness, no one had built upon the ground since the windmills, and they had apparently caused quite a stir, since people to this day talked about them not having the proper allowance to be there. Yet here were new additions, and with the recent guidelines of visits being prohibited due to snakes, it made sense that someone very recently and surreptitiously put them up. The monotone forest ambience persisted as they descended a little slope towards the first of the shacks. It did not seem very inhabitable, being mostly just a room, a construction made to ward off the most trivial of forest elements. Inside was some form of storage, with barrels and baskets. Maria remained to investigate while Brador and German went ahead. Past it stood another shack, with additional, similar structures surrounding it. Peering inside revealed a bit more of interest. A more dedicated station of research, as it would appear, with tools and components as if plucked straight from the clinic above. It made German look up past the crown of the roof, up along the steep slope where the very outskirts of Yarnam was barely visible beyond the hill crest. "German," Brador whispered, having just stepped through the doorway. He pointed to someone lying curled up beneath the table along the innermost wall. On top of it stood some canisters and vials, some of which was tipped over, and various fine metal instruments, such as scalpels, pincers and needles, lay strewn over the floor. The body was turned with its back to them, feet drawn up tightly into a ball, and judging by how uncannily still it lay for several seconds, it was presumed deceased. German approached to try and identify it. Upon turning it over towards him, he jumped backward as a number of snakes tumbled out with the body. As its arms spread out, so too did snakes that seemed to have fed on the departed's intestines. They did not appear very interested with German as they slithered away behind the shelter of the body once more. The woman was dressed in a pure white garb of the healing church, and judging by what details could be discerned through the grime and bloodstains, this was a fairly upstanding member to boot. With her face being ravaged by discolored veins and sunken features, it was impossible for him to even faintly recognize her.
Outside.
He marched towards the door, and Brader jumped out of his way.
Who was that?
I don't know. He looked around and saw Maria heading out from her shack, coming towards them.
A body.
His words got her to speed up. He pointed inside and she threw a quick look, simply to confirm he was correct.
What in the world? What were they doing here?
A very subtle shuffle came from another adjacent shack. A foot stepping over wood. It became more inaudible as it started stepping in grass. Someone came around the corner of the building, visible down through the space in between the shacks. There was a suppressed, gasping sound when the person reached out a hand towards them. It emitted a low groan that was interrupted by a wet and forceful sound as the silhouette of the head expanded violently and grew out like tree branches within the span of a second. Snakes had emerged from its head, and they now caused the accursed character to stumblingly walk towards them like their puppet. As the many serpentine heads shifted closer towards them, it was like the body was forced to follow along as they shifted the balance. Each of them took a step back at the unfolding of events, all brandishing their armaments. While nothing else could be seen to change around them, more shuffling bodies and their footsteps was heard.
Cover me!
German whispered as commandingly as was possible and stepped ahead of them to meet the amalgam of puppeteering snakes with an uppercut of the curved blade. Some of the serpents were severed by the blow, but many still remained, while the body was being jerked around by their dominating movements. They braced and in turn jabbed their fanged heads down at him. He was forced to step back closer to the others. They had both turned in opposite directions as another of the snake men appeared. The sound of another head being burst open was heard somewhere nearby, blood spilling as several slithering bodies simultaneously buried their way outside. He merged the blade and threw the scythe over his shoulder, cutting over the man's chest, spun around to plunge the blade straight down amidst the snakes. The body crumpled down, but the snakes persisted to bite after him, so he stepped back and from a safe distance extended the scythe to rake off the heads of the remaining snakes. To his right, Maria had engaged with another of the aberrations, approaching from further behind. She was currently darting around the body, avoiding the snakes striking down at her, cutting their heads as she moved around the body, making shuddering convulsions. To the left, Brader too faced multiple adversaries, but seemed less prepared for it. The snake-ridden man waved with one arm in front of him, while the others seemed to have completely different intentions, as it made several attempts to strike and swipe at him amidst the barrage of serpentine maws. German jumped to his side, extending the scythe to reach with the blade around the humanoid form and pulled it away from Brador. He then struck down diagonally, trying to cleave as many heads as he could. Brador was quick to continue his confrontation, by which point German managed to glimpse his competence with his strangely designed brass mace. The head had 4 jagged blades and 2 spiked tips emerged just below it, giving it a rather sinister appearance. At first glance, it appeared like something you'd find at some eccentric collector's home, but Brador was truly capable of utilizing it like a veteran. There was heart and spirit in every strike, and he wielded it with calculating composure. As he bashed the snake's heads, he appeared like a different man entirely. German shouted his name, and without further indications, he shoved their target in the back with the pommel end of the burial blade, sending the body stumbling forward. As Brador was allowed more space by this maneuver, he stepped forward upon his name being called, and with both hands on the handle, turned to strike at the legs of a second incoming monster. The impact toppled the body and Brador continued forward, standing up at a safe distance from the attacking serpents, and aimed the blow straight down into the back of the snake-possessed man. The body jolted and remained still, enabling them to simply step away from the snakes, evidently confined to a limp body. German spun around with the scythe, where the body he pushed had just turned his way. The properties of his weapon's cleave was perfectly suited for such a foe, and by slightly tugging at the handle to aim the slash towards him, he severed each head of the snakes, making the body gradually crumple to the ground, eventually becoming entirely still. Maria too had found a suitable tactic once they rushed for her aid. They discovered it was unnecessary, as one already lay on the ground, with the remaining one suffering its heads being severed one by one, as she simply awaited them to jab, then cut them clean off with her twin blades. It fell similarly to German's previous foe, and as it did, she flicked elegantly with the blades to toss off their blood. They gathered around the recently felled body, looking down at it. It was not alone in wearing the recurring white cleric garb, a fact German likely was not alone in contemplating.
How unsightly!
Maria gasped.
Oh, what could have caused something like this?
You know, German nudged the body with his foot, turning it over on its back. It will be hard to confirm, but I gather Corin is among them. Her eyes darted over the ground until she turned around and walked over, blade still in her hands, to one of the uninvestigated shacks. The two of them followed. With their guard up, they searched more of them. It appeared that some had been added, but likely that most were remnants built back when the windmills were. It was clear they had been modified for new use, restored from abandonment. At first they contained mostly workshops or crude laboratories for things evidently not proper to be conducted at the clinic. Seeing how all wore churchly attire, German assumed these were the missing doctors from the clinic. Eventually, the shacks seemed to have been used for different purposes. They were empty, with remnants of shedded snake skins, some of which were so large the size of the creature that felled it was hard to imagine.
They must have been the missing doctors,
German said while looking up into the roof of another laboratory.
Someone must have moved everything here. I don't think they just stumbled upon this and turned into unfortunate victims.
You think they suffer the consequences of their own actions?
Maria walked up to a desk with a candle, some raggedy books, and a coffer to the side.
It would explain why the clinics suddenly became abandoned. All of them were not in a position to return. But what could have caused it?
Brador joined Maria at the table. While she knelt down by the coffer, he started turning open one of the books.
What does it say, Brador?
He turned the pages.
This one is about snake species in some way. This...
He picked up another while he handed the former to German. Maria had resorted to prying open the lock on the coffer, as it was evidently sealed.
This one seems... I really don't know. About animals again.
With the lid open, Maria started placing new books and papers out from it onto the table.
Here, notes.
Notes? By...
German had taken one note that detailed the documentation on a procedure conducted on a specimen. It was not very formally written, more like a paper torn from a diary, but still with the wordings of someone seasoned as a scholar. It spoke of an introduction of a source and how the specimen reacted to it. There seemed to be a desire on the writer's part to alter said source so a preferred outcome would occur, but more than that was not mentioned. The specimen ultimately perished, to his own understanding, and it was noted that further experiments cannot involve the direct source. When he looked up from his paper, Maria was staring into a small book, with her mouth slightly open, her brow unconsciously contorted in horror.
Maria?
She shook her head and continued reading. He picked up one of the books she had placed on the table. Flipping it open somewhere in the middle revealed drawn pictures of human body parts. Notes explained how something would be introduced, most recurring around the torso area, but sometimes the pictures were of an arm and even a head.
German.
Her voice trembled.
They did this on humans. They must have. That's what it says. They wanted to create an antidote.
She spoke slowly and on the verge of a quivering whisper.
Slow down now. What are you saying?
She rubbed her eyes and dropped the book to the floor.
They did this to themselves. Like you said. It said that Corin was the first. Someone did it to him in the hopes of creating immunity. They thought it could grow in the body.
tears started to pour from her eyes, and she fervently tried to wipe them away, while her breathing became more and more uncontrollable. German could not believe it. Not like her. He stepped towards her, but she held out a hand, stopping him. Her face had become red, and she turned away. She was not sad, or desperately unsettled like he thought. He almost took a step back when he saw that her eyes were, in fact, brimming with anger. Maria grabbed firm hold of the doorknob in such a way German did not think it unreasonable that she would pull it straight off. But she froze entirely where she stood. Her lips quivered and her eyes soon burst with tears again. Yet she remained dignifiedly firm. She remained like so for a long time, until German could no longer stand seeing her pain. He reached out to lay his hand over hers on the doorknob and completed the motion for her. Together, they opened the door and walked in, Brador following behind, likely with questions of his own fluttering around in his head that had rendered him silent since the revelation came to light. The reading hall was empty and mostly dark save for the light at a desk in the middle of the room. Lawrence looked up at them, first bothered, but quickly changed to a welcoming smile.
Lawrence, tell me the truth.
Her tone made his expression change into grave concern.
Your meeting with Corin, what was it about?
She trembled only slightly in her voice, which he knew was contained wrath. What is the matter? What?
Lawrence, just tell me.
He stood up, but froze upon her raising her voice. It was about work. The Ashen Blood. He was working on it from his clinic.
Yes, but what specifically?
Have you found something? You seem upset.
I am upset, Lawrence.
German held up a hand in front of her. It seemed she welcomed the relief not to speak with him, and she drew back. We know why he disappeared. It also concerns why his clinic has been empty the recent days. But things still do not add up, Lawrence. What happened? And pardon me, but who is this? He looked at Brador and the young man was about to step forward, but stopped once German spoke. My student Brador. We want to know, Lawrence. Did you know about any research regarding pathogen formulas being administered to the saints? He blinked 3 times rapidly and leaned his head back. He looked almost foolishly surprised. That sounds... He trailed off as his eyes glanced over to Maria. She had crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes, glaring lethally at him. He threw a quick, concerned look at Brador, then spoke. I do, in fact. It was a thesis proposed to me, among others.
But not me. Do tell, Master Vicar.
Maria said with such a demeaning tone, Lawrence was ready to shrink where he stood. It never became relevant. Dr. Kim, Dr. Harald and myself made several points against it, so, well, it never became more than a theory.
Well, it did. How do you suppose that happened?
He looked between her and German with great remorse. I didn't want to worry you. I see you with the blood saints, as well as the patients. Your smile to them seems so precious. Precious enough that I dared not tamper with it.
Oh, Lawrence, you fool. Was it Corin's idea?
Yes.
So again, what was your meeting about?
Nothing of that sort, I can assure you. He raised his voice somewhat and took a step forward. Like many others, he investigated his patients and sent reports, samples to the research hall while conducting some of the work at his clinic. A remedy to enhance the blood's properties against the ashen blood was a priority. Everyone knew it. Everyone worked towards it. Now what did you find? German stepped forward and placed the bundle from the coffer on his desk. A sloppily contained heap with what they had examined to acquire a clear overview. He had found a source in the Forbidden Forest. There is a passage from the clinic out in the garden. A what? Hold on. They set up a research base in the forest. I suspect Corin and his doctors are dead, along with many others. Lauren's mouth opened slightly as he stared wide-eyed at him. He retained the belief that the poison could be introduced into the body, facilitated by the holy blood to act as a shield, a resistance, an immunity against its harmful properties. As shown with the snakes, there had to be something that allowed the body to resist it. They used blood on snakes to try and create something that could fit humans. Once they thought they had it, they introduced humans to it.
Then what?
They died.
Even Corin?
He said shakily. German nodded.
Ah. He thought that the saint's properties greatly soothes the patients. Long has it been thought the cure lies with them, the immunity. How did it all end?
I don't know. No one was around to detail it. Snakes infested their bodies like parasites. Something must have gone wrong for it to become like this. But it looks to me they believed in this, whatever they had in their heads.
I can't believe it. He was such a caring man, doing everything for his patients.
He looked down at the notes they brought.
The saints. The blood. He must have been so determined. Until the very end. But it amounted to nothing.
Maria stepped forward.
He was a fool until the end. Now, Maria. He was at least willing to struggle onward. I knew it. You admire him. You admire that he sacrificed in this pursuit.
You misunderstand. We knew the man. Is it not slightly sad that he's gone? Succumbing to a pursuit that had at least some noble intentions.
He got what he deserved. Saving people by killing people.
Maria, I cannot agree. Not in the slightest. As we know, humanity is capable of building up immunities. While many perish at its hand, the strong survive. The way I see it, Corin tried to minimize the number that was already destined to die. She crossed her arms and continued in a contemptuous tone.
Fear it, Lawrence. Remember? All this talk of evolution, hastening nature's work. Here you have it, before your very eyes. This is how it will end. Don't admire him. He tried and failed because he should have known better. No amount of blood will turn you into a god. A god that can save everyone. That has never been the world we live in.
But we can try. I can try. I never thought to hear such callousness from you, Maria. You know there will be deaths, but I can at least try to save them. If we are doomed, as you say, then... He took a deep breath to calm himself. His outburst had surprised all of them, perhaps even himself a little. If God dictates our loved ones to die before our eyes just to satisfy the greater whole, then I will at least try to wrestle the reins from him. Thank you dearly. I hope it was not too taxing. The pallid woman nodded absent-mindedly and smiled while Wynne received the vial of her own, recently drawn blood. No, not at all. You look tired, dear. Why don't you have a rest, These new procedures must be approached with care, especially for you and what you go through.
Oh, yes. I do hope the blood will suffice.
I'm sure it will. You've done more than enough. It's about time I get to work with this.
All right, Mr. Wynne. I will retire to the dormitory for the day. See if I perhaps can rest up finally.
Do so, dear. He watched as she walked down through the hallway and turned the corner before he entered through the double frosted glass paneled door behind him. The research room he emerged into was small and crowded with an overabundance of implements, tools and many other things one at first glance would not immediately associate with the anatomical field. A window with forest overview lay covered with shelves carrying glass and tin jars. There was a door in the opposite corner, leading into a small nook, housing the sanitary measures needed for the work. In the middle of the room, among shelf and cupboard-occupied walls, stood a high table with a body atop. Although deceased, the victims of the ash and blood still held abundance of information. The body was racked with blackened discoloration, paired with the pale complexion of a corpse. He quickly carried out a sanitation ritual before making ready to approach the departed patient. He tilted back the head with a wooden block under the neck, so it leaned back to the degree the mouth opened up. With care he readied one of the particularly long needles, with which he extracted some of the blood he had been brought. He made an effort to steady his hand and aim before entering with the needle in through the nose. He accidentally scraped against inner tissue until finding the proper texture that he recognized as the accurate point of administration. After injecting just a slight hint of the contents in the needle, he was quick to move over to the chest, where he injected some into the heart, then onto the right hand, into a vein slightly above the wrist. He turned the hand over and gently poked each fingertip with a metal-pointed rod. The provoked movement in the middle finger was slight and quick, but he saw it and thus could proceed. He turned his attention towards one of the darkened spots on the same arm. Within its area was smaller, almost black veins visible on the pale skin, distinguishing them as a horrible webbing. With a scalpel he carved out a piece of the skin, exposing the flesh beneath. There he administered the needle with a larger dose of blood than before. Quickly, he brought a magnifying glass before his face and peered onto the flesh. After a short moment, did the blackness faintly start to recede, growing into a more vibrant crimson before starting to fade into a dull, dead pink. He made a delighted grunt and returned to jab gently into one of the fingertips, which gave the same response as before. He then removed the skin over the bicep and similarly administered blood to the same effect. He made another point into the finger, confirming the movement before cutting out the part that had been rejuvenated. He laid it neatly onto a glass tray and brought it over to the desk by the window where the daylight flowed into the room. Having put the flesh piece into a small jar, the door opened slightly and Dr. Kim peeked her head inside. She lit up once she saw him and fully stepped inside.
Junior. So, he dumped the work onto you. Typical.
I don't mind. Much more exciting than other things.
What? Passing the opportunity to be around young women? I would think someone like you to be all over them.
Well, they must get their opportunity to rest, no? Soon enough they'll be ready for me again. She erupted in a mild laughter that nearly resembled that of contempt.
Oh, you fiend. Delightfully fiendish.
He retrieved a giant jar with the special preservative reagent from beneath the desk, removed the lid and started to extract some with a large syringe. Beside him, Kim walked over to stand with hands on her back, peering outside the window.
It seems we have them to thank. Luckily he will be one of the last, it seems.
She nodded over at the operating table.
Yes, indeed. How do the new treatments fare?
The results are the same as here. Just what we had hoped. A pure ward formula.
He emptied the syringe into the jar with the sample, filling it up. It's good to resume research again, having things back to normal.
After all, you did not apply to be a doctor.
Yes, that's very true. He put the lid onto the jar and sealed it, placing it aside and turning to her.
Done?
She asked and wrinkled her nose, peering over at the body. He nodded and they quickly vacated the small room out into the hall.
It was indeed a lucky break that new properties were discovered as soon as they did.
You mean the extract from the poison? She nodded.
I would have liked to dedicate more research to it, but you know how it is.
Indeed. But there was no time. People were falling right and left. We had to set up emergency administrations.
Sure. Perhaps I should admit that it is a bit aggravating that the solution seemed to fall out of the blue. I think it was that Corin that was onto something before his passing.
That's right. What a shame. They perished in Old Yarnum, right? Heard they went there treating the sick directly. She shrugged and crossed her arms, not looking particularly mournful.
Foolish for someone like him to put himself at risk, with all his ongoing research. But I suppose that's just how he was. I'm not that surprised after all.
But why did you think it was he that discovered it? I thought your department did.
Just a hunch. And no, suddenly one of the saints simply matched. It goes to show just how little control you have with so many components at play. It was daring, I must say, but the Holy Blood finally managed to eliminate the harmful properties.
Yes, it is most fortunate. It pained me to see how the saints were exposed to that poison. She perked up to the degree she was likened to how a cat grows tentative at the notion of prey.
Ha! That's also a thing, isn't it? Poison.
Oh, I did not mean literally. Just what they found so the saints could cultivate immunity, you know? I have no idea where the exact source is.
You're a dull blade, Junior. Perhaps it serves you better than being sharp. At least you are not overthinking like I do.
What then? She suddenly lost her witty leer and looked ahead in the corridor where two blood saints approached for a moment before turning through a door on the left.
Oh well, the Holy Blood is unpredictable. Suddenly it matched. That's about it.
Yes, I see why you would be bothered. It would be nice to have the whole truth when it comes to such chemistry. She shook her head and looked at him for a moment with the same uncertain expression.
Not like that. It's... never mind.
Well, it turned out great in the end, despite their tireless work. Is that not what our goal is? To prevent sickness through cultivating health? She nodded her head aggressively.
Of course. But practice the discovery with caution, Junior. You might think everything is fine and dandy, but the higher up you get in the circles, you must pay close attention to what they truly say and do.
He sneakily rolled his eyes. And what is it that they do? She became still and calm in her posture.
Not enough. Not when it comes to combat a plague. As it was, it all felt so strange. Admittedly, I have never been treating an epidemic before, but I thought it would be more than just pumping blood into everyone until it goes away.
Perhaps the Church's pursuit of communion is the panacea after all.
What do you think? She ceased looking captured by her argument and brightened up in a smile.
Oh, nothing really. I have so much work to occupy my mind anyways.
Oh yes, quite. When is Citus returning? It sounded like he only stepped out for a brief moment. Now it was Dr. Kim who rolled her eyes, albeit more in regards to the statement.
Oh, yes, quite. Who knows? He has probably been caught up in one of them experimental projects. The ever-elusive and arcane projects of the School of Mensis.
She gestured broadly and dramatically with her arms. You find her work strange?
Bah, no, not particularly so. It's just those crones. Not academics in the slightest, and behaving like their practice is some sort of science. Mind you, I have all the respect for Lady Carol. It is all just too unconventional for my taste.
Anselm did not proclaim it out loud. He only stood and smiled wide in the doorway.
Here we finally are, Miss Engel. And look who's happy to see her.
She had received a proper homecoming, with both clerics and constables escorting her, wheelchair bound as she were. Anselm came out to meet her.
How is it, mother?
She waved a hand dismissively.
I'm perfectly fine, dear. No need for this spectacle.
She grabbed the armrest in an attempt to stand, but one of the clerics was quick with a hand on her shoulder.
Slow, all right? Remember to take it slow.
Irritated, she bobbed with her head side to side to quickly brush off the encouragement, then stood up to embrace her son.
It is just good to be back in my own home again.
But you had us properly frightened.
That's right, Anselm's pal added.
The whole yard has been up in flames over you. Luckily, none have lost a relative.
Oh, how kind.
She blushed slightly.
You just come down to the clinic if there is the slightest problem now,
the cleric pointed out.
But since the symptoms have vanished so smoothly, I believe it is the last we see of you, if we are lucky.
Oh, thank you dearly. Blessed be the Holy Blood.
The cleric nodded back warmly and turned with a chair.
Why don't we go inside?
He ushered her in, where they immediately turned into the kitchen, where one of her dearest friends awaited, together with a packed table of a full dinner and lit candles.
Yup, that son of yours sure can cook.
Her friend commented as she walked up to embrace her as well. Engel stood in awe.
Oh, but you needn't.
Don't start it, mother. I would not have you be alone and start working the second you arrive back home. Let us care for you in the coming days.
She squeezed Anselm's arm with joy.
Well, let's just get it out of the way.
for it to never be spoken about again. But how did you fare with the treatment?
She shook her head lightly and rolled her eyes under her closed lids.
Oh, so much blood. You would not believe it. And then you are barely conscious from hours of pain. I was practically only lucid when they administered blood. And so much of it, mind you. Might as well become one of those blood saints by now.
They all chuckled heartily, glad everything was as it should.
Antidote. Small medicinal tablets that counteract poison. Used to treat ashen blood, the baffling sickness that ravaged old Yarnum long ago. These tablets only provide short-term relief. The ashen blood ailment eventually triggered the spread of the beastly scourge.